Thank you. And Mark, I believe we have some breaking news.
Vonnie, we do have some breaking news. Shots have been fired outside the UK Parliament here in London. Now, at least one person's being treated and held at gunpoint by police. Bloomberg reporters see two people on the ground outside Parliament. People on the ground are within the precincts of Parliament here in London, in Westminster. Now, the police have closed the streets around London's Parliament Square. And another development is the House of Commons. The sitting in the House of Commons has been suspended. We'll continue to monitor this and bring you further developments. But the breaking news is shots have been fired outside the UK Parliament here in London. Stay with us. This is Bloomberg. Got some breaking news here in London. Shots have been fired outside the Parliament here in London. At least one person is being treated and held at gunpoint by police. Bloomberg reporters at the scene see two people on the ground outside the Houses of Parliament. The people on the ground are within the precincts of Parliament here in London, in Westminster. Police closing streets around Parliament Square, and the House of Commons sitting has been suspended as well. A message from the Met Police. They are aware of reports of the incident at the Houses of Parliament here in London. We'll continue to monitor the developments, and we'll try and get our man on the scene, Rob Hutton, in just a few minutes. Let's just break away. I want to bring our oil man here today. Bloomberg News, just reiterating this breaking news here in London. Shots have been fired outside the Houses of Parliament here in London. Now, Bloomberg reporters at the scene see two people on the ground outside Parliament. They're within the precincts of Parliament here in London. Police have closed the streets around Parliament Square. Now, the sitting in the House of Commons has been suspended. Of course, we had PMQs earlier when Prime Minister Theresa May took questions from fellow MPs. The Met Police says it is aware of reports of the incident at London Parliament. Do continue to watch Bloomberg to hear developments on this story. We will continue to monitor this story very closely. You are watching Bloomberg Television. Stay with us. Breaking news here in London. Shots have been fired outside Parliament in Westminster here. At least two people are being treated, according to a Bloomberg reporter on the scene. Now, the shootings took place along the road inside the gates of Parliament, leading onto the square, onto Parliament Square. That's according to our reporter. Police have closed the streets around the area. Work in the House of Commons has been suspended. Let's not forget, Wednesday is traditionally PMQs, when Prime Minister Theresa May takes questions from her fellow members of Parliament. One of the people on the ground appears to have been shot by a plainclothes police officer, according to a witness account. We are endeavouring to get our UK government reporter for Bloomberg News, Rob Hutton, on the phone. Vonnie, we'll continue to monitor the story.
Yes. Keep you abreast of all the headlines. It's 90 minutes into the trading day here in the US. Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle is here with the latest. Abigail.
Abigail, I just want to keep you updated on this breaking story. If you've just joined us, shots have been fired outside the Houses of Parliament here in London. We're hearing at least two people are being treated. This is according to a Bloomberg reporter who is at the scene. Now, these shootings took place along the road inside the gates of Parliament, leading onto the square known as Parliament Square, according to our reporter. Police have closed streets around the area, and work in the House of Commons has been suspended. Now, one of the people on the ground appears to have been shot by a plainclothes police officer. This is live pictures. That's the view from Westminster Bridge. To the left is the Houses of Commons. You can see the police cars, the sirens, the flashing lights in the middle of your picture right there. Clearly, the area has been cordoned off. Just to bring you some further headlines, armed police with pistols drawn have been seen entering UK Parliament. Two ambulances are now within the precincts of the UK Parliament. We're hearing from Bloomberg reporters that people are being treated on Westminster Bridge. That is a shot from Westminster Bridge. Two people, or people should I say, just to reiterate, according to Bloomberg reporters, are being treated on Westminster Bridge. To the left is the Houses of Commons, Houses of Parliament, and just to the forefront, which you can't see, that is a standpoint from Westminster Bridge. We'll continue to bring you updates, Vonnie. In the House of Commons, just to reiterate, the chamber has been advised by police to remain in lockdown, and the Commons will remain suspended until further notice. Vonnie, we'll keep you updated on all the latest developments on this story.
Mark, yes, indeed. Let's hope that that's the extent of it.
Vonnie, I just want to bring you up to speed on this developing story here in London. Shots have been fired outside the Houses of Parliament here in London and Westminster. At least 2 people are being treated. This is according to a Bloomberg reporter on the ground. Those are live pictures. It's taken the picture from Westminster Bridge, just off Westminster, where, of course, the Houses of Parliament is situated. You can see the police cars, you can see an ambulance. Clearly, the area has been cordoned off to an extent. There's a limit to what we can see there. What we do know, because there is a Bloomberg reporter on the ground, the shootings took place along the road inside the gates of Parliament, leading onto the square. You can't see that there. Police have closed streets around the area. Work in the House of Commons, it should be said, has been suspended today. Of course, traditionally, Prime Minister Theresa May takes questions during PMQs from her fellow members. That already has happened. She answered questions on Scotland and other issues today. One of the people on the ground appears to have been shot by a plainclothes police officer. This is according to a witness account. We are also hearing from the BBC there are reports of a vehicle mowing down several people on the bridge. That is the bridge you can see there. That is Westminster Bridge. There is footage from the BBC showing people lying injured on Westminster Bridge. Heavy London police, ambulance, fire service presence is on Westminster Police as well. That's something we should be aware of. 2 ambulances are now within the UK Parliament precinct. Let's bring in our UK government reporter for Bloomberg News, Rob Hutton. Rob, what can you tell us?
Well, I can tell you about what I can see from our window overlooking Parliament Square here, where a few minutes ago one of my colleagues was astonished to see someone running in and then being shot. And there now appear to be 2 people on the ground who are being treated next to ambulances. A helicopter air ambulance has landed in Parliament Square. Parliament Square is shut off to all traffic. It's possible that there is someone else being treated on the bridge, but I can't see, and we're not allowed to leave our offices at the moment. Parliament is in a total security lockdown. And the other thing that we are seeing is a large number of armed police come running into the building. Whether that's just a security precaution, I'm unable to tell you.
Rob, we're just hearing from the House of Commons leader, Mr. Liddington, that a policeman was apparently stabbed, an assailant has been shot, and we're also hearing from the police, Rob, that this major incident has been declared in the Met Police area of London. So the police is calling it a major incident. Mr. Liddington has made comments to lawmakers in the House of Commons. Rob, we're hearing from the BBC that it's possible people were mown down. Are you able to see any evidence of that on Westminster Bridge or not?
No, I have heard that report too, that something happened on Westminster Bridge. I can see just about, trying to lean out of the window here, I can see at least 2 ambulances out on Westminster Bridge, which runs next to Big Ben. My view is effectively from Big Ben down past Westminster Abbey. And I can see 2 ambulances there, so it does look like people have been injured on the bridge, but I'm unable to tell you more, I'm afraid.
Now, Rob, we know that they had been debating, things like the Scotland vote or potential Scotland vote and Brexit and so forth. Do we know where all the members of Parliament are, where Theresa May is?
Well, today is a busy day in Parliament. It's Prime Minister's questions here, so there's always a full chamber for that. That ended, I suppose, about an hour and a half ago. So a lot of MPs won't have been in the chamber for the afternoon debate, but a lot of them will be on the premises. It's a busy working day. We don't know where Theresa May is at the moment. There are lots of ways of getting her safely back to Downing Street. It is quite common for prime ministers, after prime minister's questions, to stay in the building and talk to MPs and do various bits of business. But actually, she did have a 3:30 appointment to see a Polish politician. I can now see somebody is being lifted onto a stretcher, I guess, and I can see that they are doing CPR down there. So the Prime Minister did have an appointment in Downing Street this afternoon, so probably she had already gone back for that when this happened.
It does appear that these incidents are at least multifold. Do we know if they're separate incidents, or if I guess the police haven't figured that out yet, or sent out?
The police, I'm afraid we just don't know at this point. I mean, as we know, one of the features of modern terrorism is, if that is what this is the multiple simultaneous attack. But this is real speculation at the moment, I'm afraid. I just don't know.
Rob, given that this is, the home of UK politics, this is, an extremely secure area. I mean, these incidents, it should be stressed, are extremely rare, aren't they?
They are. And I mean, in a way, we have always been expecting an attack on Parliament. And over the years, more than a decade that I've worked here, a feature has always been the increasing levels of security. And there's the visible security. This is one of the few places in Britain where you will see a policeman with a submachine gun. There are the less visible layers of security, the way that they have built the gates and they have built barriers around the place that you wouldn't necessarily notice if you didn't look for them, that are built very deeply into the ground to prevent people driving trucks or whatever at the building. So I suppose we have always expected that someone would make an attempt one day, but it's still shocking when it happens.
We're seeing pictures, Rob, of a car, a number of police officers around the car. Seems to be a person laying on the ground, the police officers, possibly the ambulance crew, the emergency services surrounding that person. Just momentarily before, we saw a helicopter on Parliament Square. Rob, is there any suggestion, as you say, Parliament business has been suspended, is there any suggestion for how long, given an incident like this, that business will be suspended?
No, there isn't. I mean, there are two competing priorities here. The first is to create business as usual, to make the point that Britain continues in the face of these things. On the other hand, the major priority will be the securing and making safe of Parliament. I can just see someone is now being loaded, one of the people in Parliament Square is being loaded into an ambulance. Sorry. Carry on.
Take us through again exactly what happened and the first that you knew of whatever kind of attack this is, how it was communicated to the media in the House of Commons.
Well, this is actually taking place, because it's taking place in Parliament Square, we can all see it out of our windows, because the press gallery physically runs from Big Ben to what you would think of as the main part of Parliament. So, unfortunately, we've had a ringside seat for this appalling incident. I suppose about half an hour ago, one of my colleagues came running in and said someone's been shot. And we came and we could see two people on the ground in the courtyard outside Parliament, outside the Great Hall of Westminster. And very rapidly, the square was sealed off, and an air ambulance arrived shortly afterwards. And since then, the main thing that we've seen is large numbers of armed police, some with pistols, some with submachine guns, some clearly summoned. The new location of Scotland Yard is now actually right next to Parliament, so they're extremely close, and many of them were obviously in plain clothes, summoned at short notice to get down here, some carrying shields, bulletproof shields. And since then, we've been watching as the square is sealed off, and they attempt to help these people who are on the ground in front of us in the square.
Rob, we're hearing from AP that, as I did say earlier, the leader of the House of Commons, David Lidington, says a police officer has been stabbed outside Parliament. So
yes,
that's the latest we're hearing from AP,
yes,
of course.
So while we were looking at this in the chamber of Westminster, David Lidington, who's the leader of the House of Commons, gave a brief statement in which, yes, he said that a police officer had been stabbed and someone else had been shot. And that is the only official statement that we've had in Parliament, and Parliament is now suspended.
And Rob, of course, it comes as the world's attention is on Westminster ahead of Wednesday, March the 29th. This now, of course, completely overshadowing that. But the world's attention was leading up to, the triggering of Brexit, something that many across the country and across the world have waited since the referendum in June. Yes,
it has. Yes, I mean, this is this will completely overshadow all of that, and it just goes to show how much events can run out of control for a Prime Minister. Now, I've just been shown some pictures by a colleague of Westminster Bridge, which, as I told you, I couldn't see, which has been stopped. I can see 2 stationary buses and a stationary truck there, and there's police and ambulance appear to be helping people on the ground, but more than that, I can't tell you about what's going on out there.
Rob, we have an aerial shot. We can see Big Ben. We can see the entirety of the House of Commons, Parliament Square, and all sorts of activity, the emergency services, which are to the side of the Houses of Parliament, up to Westminster Bridge. So we've probably got a better.
Yes, you may now actually have a better sense of what's going on than we do.
Rob, can you tell us? Can you see crowds of people? I mean, if this whole area is cordoned
being held back. I mean, all of Parliament Square is now closed off, and actually, it looks like Whitehall has now been cleared. Whitehall is the street that Downing Street is on. Whitehall now appears to have been cleared. I can see police telling people to go back inside their offices. As the road to Victoria Station, there is a crowd of people being held back by police tape there. Parliament is, of course, right in the centre of London, so this is a major traffic intersection. There's lots of people who are just trying to go through here on their way to places. And it looks like Victoria Street, in fact, it looks like all the cars have now been cleared out of there as well. So police are obviously taking this extremely seriously. I mean, they do have, the police plan for these incidents. They prepare for these things. We all know that one of these things might happen. The last comparable thing I can recall was in 2005, the second attack on the London Underground, when I was caught in a lockdown in Downing Street. And on that occasion, a tourist approaching the gates was nearly shot because he failed to understand what was going on. And so police have studied these things extremely carefully and made serious plans.
And it's made all the more difficult, Rob, as you say, by this is the centre of London. This is the centre of power, political power here in London. So this is an area which one can access from many sides. So there will be many people who have been held back by the emergency services. Rob, please stay on the line and do what you need to do. And we'll come back to you. Emma Ross-Thomas, of course, our London bureau chief, is here. Emma, can you fill us in on what you've discovered in the last few minutes?
Well, of course, Rob is down there. He was sort of witnessing this from the very beginning, so he is certainly your best source. The police still aren't sort of giving any indication of, whether this is one incident or two, what exactly is going on. It's pretty fast moving. it's also true that, we have all been waiting for something like this for quite a long time.
And as Rob cited, 2005 was the last incident we all remember. Since then, there have been many other incidents.
Emma.
France, in Brussels, to name but a few. Vonnie.
How could something like this happen? If security is as tight as everybody makes out, how could somebody with a car that's potentially out of control or a knife or firearm get past all of that heavy-duty security at a time when you say we're expecting something like this?
Well, of course, Westminster Bridge is a public bridge. So there wouldn't be any sort of restrictions on Westminster Bridge to cars.
So where does the security come in then? Perhaps, Mark, you can give us some context too. Do you meet the security after Westminster Bridge, at which point you're already right by Parliament?
Right, I mean, maybe Rob is actually down there. He can answer that question with sort of more detail. But it's not clear exactly if anything has happened inside Parliament. All this seems to have happened outside the Houses of Parliament, so it would appear that security has done its job, as it were, by stopping anyone going into Parliament. Is that what you understand, Rob?
You can see the gates there, Vonnie. I mean, this is this shot highlights it perfectly. Around those gates, around that fence which surrounds the area around the Houses of Parliament, there obviously is constant police presence on a daily basis. You drive through there, you see the police. So that is the area which one would say has the most heightened presence of police. But if you just walk around, Vonnie, if you just walk around Parliament Square, you see a constant presence of police and emergency services.
I just want to jump in, Mark, and say that the president here in the US, Donald Trump, has just had an update on London. That's the latest. President Trump was speaking at the White House at a healthcare event, and he has had an update now on London. Mark and Emma, is it obvious that Parliament, at least the area around Parliament, was the target of this?
Vonnie, I just want to bring in some more breaking news. Prime Minister Theresa May's office has confirmed that the Prime Minister is safe. That's just coming through right now. So Theresa May is safe after this incident in Parliament. We were unaware because, of course, today, Emma, is PMQs, isn't it?
Right, and of course what we've also seen is an image of the actual chamber where the MPs are all sort of sitting in lockdown, and they've been advised to remain there in lockdown. Yeah. So we know that they are safe as well.
Yes. So Parliament business is suspended and we await.
That's right.
It's no coincidence, though, right, guys, that this happened in Parliament Square. I mean, this is clearly somebody trying to get, or at least trying to create a nuisance around Parliament Square, if not actually get into Parliament. Can we say that much?
I think that much is clear.
And as Rob said, Ronnie, it's important to stress this is very rare, given this is the home of politics. This incident is very rare, but as you said, Emma, and as Rob said as well, there's been a case of this has been waiting to happen.
And many reports of thwarted attacks over the last decade or so.
We'll recap in a moment. We're still gathering details about all of this, what looks to be maybe several incidents, and each slightly different, slightly separate. Let's bring back in Rob Hutton of Bloomberg News, who was at the House of Parliament. He's our parliamentary reporter for Bloomberg in London. Rob, any updates since your last update to us?
Hi. Well, the main update that we've had here, as you were saying, is that we have now been told that the Prime Minister is safe. One of the ambulances that was treating one of the two people on the ground here has now left. The other ambulance is still here. It appears that they have stopped treating the person who is on the ground here, though the ambulance is still here. We can also see on the bridge approach that runs alongside Parliament, there is a car crashed into the wall, it seems, next to Parliament Square. Now, as I was saying earlier, these walls, I mean, these are stone walls, but they are even stronger than they look. They are buried deep into the ground because there has long been a fear that somebody would attempt to drive some kind of vehicle into Parliament and try and break in that way, and a lot of thought has gone into how you would prevent that. I think you were asking earlier whether it's possible to simply cut the square off for traffic permanently. The problem is that, of course, London is a living city, and it was not designed that way. So people have to go. Parliament Square is a route from and to a lot of places. It's the home of democracy, but it's also a 4-lane roundabout. So simply to cut it off would require years of thought and work, and I think that's presumably why it's never been done. We can now see more police on the move around out here, but things do seem to have reached a moment of, I don't think calm is quite the right word, but no change.
Rob, we're seeing an aerial picture of Westminster Bridge, the south side, and even on the south side there's a lot of activity. There are emergency services personnel clearly treating somebody or some people, and we have heard from Sky News that people on Westminster Bridge are laying down on the ground. We did see that, and this aerial picture does highlight that. We've heard that an eyewitness reported at least 5 people have been hit by this vehicle. Traffic completely coming to a standstill, Rob, on Westminster Bridge. A number of London buses.
I'm now looking at television photos of someone on a gurney, a trolley being run across Westminster Bridge. I mean, on the other side of the bridge is St Thomas's Hospital. So this is very close both to the headquarters of the police and to one of London's largest hospitals. Yes, you can see that people are being treated, and you can see that the bridge is being cut off.
Rob, how far away are we in these pictures from other centres of power in London, such as 10 Downing Street, for example? And do we know if the Premier, if Theresa May, has been ushered away to another destination, perhaps somewhere in the country, or if she's actually at 10 Downing Street?
I would imagine that she is at 10 Downing Street, because that is the closest, safest place in London. We are extremely close. I mean, we're less than a 10-minute walk, 5 minutes, a quick jog, really just across the road to Downing Street. In his early days as Prime Minister, David Cameron used to do the walk to Prime Minister's questions down the road. They don't do that anymore. And there are, I'm told, though I've never seen them, there are tunnels that run underneath Whitehall so that the Prime Minister can move completely unnoticed. Actually, practically, the way that the Prime Minister tends to arrive is by car with a heavy escort. That's the quickest way the easiest way to get her back and forth from Downing Street to Parliament. But I mean, this is the hub of the British government. So it's not just Downing Street. The Ministry of Defence is on Whitehall. The Cabinet Office. Every major government department is within a 10-minute walk of where I'm sitting.
Rob, thanks for joining us. We'll get back to you very soon. Our UK government reporter for Bloomberg News, Rob Hutt, and Emma Ross Thomas, who of course is our London bureau chief as well.
Yeah,
Bonnie.
and Mark, we're teasing out all of the elements here, and I think we should say that we don't know yet that this was an attack on Parliament, but at least we know that there are incidents around the actual perimeter of Parliament, and so that's probably not a coincidence. All right, following that breaking news, we'll pivot back to the markets for a few moments. Equities dropping across the globe as investors began.
John, I just want to come back to this incident that's taking place, the incident that's taking place in London. Police have confirmed it was a terror attack. If you just joined us, multiple shots were fired near the Houses of Parliament today in London during an incident that also saw people hit by a car on Westminster Bridge. Police have said it was a terror attack. We've seen images of people on the bridge, on the sidewalk near Parliament, laying down on the ground, being treated by medical staff. At least 10 people have been injured, according to eyewitness reports, while video footage showed a crashed car nearby. John, if I can just come back to a question relevant to this incident. It's remarkable how resilient markets are, isn't it? It's been proven again and again, going back to 9/11, going back to the terror attacks here in London in 2005, going back to the attacks we've seen in France, in Brussels in the last 18 months. Markets have proven very resilient to these types of incidents, haven't they?
They most certainly have, and I think what it is by the markets is the recognition that even with this insidious problem that exists today with terrorism, is that business does go on. People get married, people buy homes, people go to school, people buy a bicycle.
Excuse me, John, we have to jump in because President Trump is going to be speaking in just a moment. He was attending a Women in Healthcare panel and he did make some comments on London. And I do want to mention one more time that the London police are saying now that they are treating the incident around the perimeter of Parliament as a terrorist incident, treating it as a terror incident. In fact, we have a moment before we get to President Trump. So, John, continue your answer.
Indeed, life goes on. It is what's proven, and it's time and time again. One just has to look at Israel, a very successful economy, and yet they've been living with terrorism for years. And it happens.
John, sorry, John, do continue that line of thinking.
Yes, and in that light, the markets reflect that. And I think, if anything, when we look historically, if you look at the at events, geopolitical events like the Russians, when the Russians were putting missiles into Cuba during the Khrushchev era, and when Jack Kennedy faced them down, the markets did experience volatility, but overall they were higher after that event. And I believe they even rebounded from a slight pullback that occurred then, that long ago. So the resilience of business, the size of economies moving forward via both cyclical trends as well as secular trends, and particularly the moment that we find ourselves in now, post a great financial crisis, it makes sense that the markets are resilient.
John, I just want to reiterate the London police say they're treating this Parliament attack as a terror incident. The Metropolitan Police says the attacks at and near Parliament, which saw at least one person shot, are being treated as terrorism. Officers, the Metropolitan Police says, including firearms officers, remain on the scene. We are treating this as a terrorist incident until we know otherwise. And just to reiterate, Vonnie, the Metropolitan Police says police are asking people to avoid the following areas: Parliament Square, Whitehall, Westminster Bridge, Lambeth Bridge, Victoria Street up to the junction with Broadway, and the Victoria Embankment up to Embankment Tube, Vonnie.
That does sound like quite an area, but they are taking every precaution, Mark, as you said, treating it as a terrorist incident. And we'll hear more from the police in London just as soon as they know more. In fact, I think treating as is definitely some kind of language that police and police departments tend to use, Mark, when they're not quite sure and they need to be very careful about what measures they take in investigating anything like this.
Vonnie, we're seeing an air ambulance lifting from Parliament Square. That air ambulance was stationed on Parliament Square for the entirety since we started covering this developing story. So that air ambulance has now left Parliament Square. Multiple shots have been fired near Parliament on Wednesday in London during an incident that also has seen people hit by a car on Westminster Bridge. And just to reiterate, police say this is a terror attack. Charles Litchfield from Eurasia is with us. Charles, can you give us your early thoughts on this incident, which police are calling a terror attack?
Well, it does seem likely that it's a terrorist attack because the car, ramming the car into individuals on Westminster Bridge, and then the attack on a policeman seemed very much intentional, and I think, from what we know, were conducted by the same person. As far as the government reaction is concerned, we don't expect too much. I mean, obviously, it's very close to home, since the attack was very close to where the MPs were debating at that very moment, and the Prime Minister was in the building as well. She's been evacuated now. We don't expect a very substantial political response, just because I think this government, while it is mostly preoccupied by Brexit, has been quite clear that it has a tough line on security. It's just passed legislation enabling it to supervise people's phone and web records for 12 months, with a degree of transparency, but not that much, which means that I think it's quite difficult for it to do much more. Apart from bolstering police presence on the streets of London, we don't really expect much of a reaction from the government.
Charles, can I ask you something? According to the language that we get from the police, they're treating this as a terrorist incident until we know otherwise. Is this typical protocol?
Yes, I think so. When it seems fairly obvious that the attack was intentional and that loss of life was the goal of the assailant, I don't think there's any point in saying we don't know. We'll have to wait and see whether it was a terrorist attack or just an accident. So it is usually the practice to say that this is being treated first and foremost as a terrorist attack until proven otherwise.
Charles, we've seen evidence of multiple terror attacks in cities like Paris in the last 18 months or so, periods where there have been not just one but 2 or 3 attacks in the not too distant past. Is there any suggestion that this could be the first of a number of attacks? Could you say that this is an incident that is just confined to the area around Parliament Square?
Well, we clearly don't know at this stage. I think the reaction of the police and the intelligence services will be one of caution. They know that it is easiest to create a sense of panic, which is their goal, the terrorist goal, by attacking multiple places in a staggered fashion. This is what happened on 2 occasions, at least in Paris, in the past 3 years. So they will assume that that is possible. And that is why Westminster has been locked down. From what I know, not only in Parliament but in various ministerial buildings, people aren't allowed to leave or move between the buildings, and they will try to gradually bring the situation back to normal as soon as they can work out whether other attacks are planned. But the assumption will be that is highly likely.
Charles, who has jurisdiction here? Is it the local Metropolitan Police? And at what point does that move to a different agency? They say they're treating it as a terror attack, a terror incident, but that has a whole variety of meanings, from, the idea that they have to treat everything as a terror incident until they know more, to the idea that, they just have to take these things seriously, but they're not litigating this. And even if it was some kind of quote-unquote terror attack, there's nothing to suggest that it wasn't a domestic attack, right?
Indeed, I think the assumption will be that it is more likely that if this is a terrorist attack, it's more likely that it has been motivated by radical Islam than any kind of domestic political motivation, although everything is possible. On who has jurisdiction, the Metropolitan Police has a counter-terrorism unit, which will be in charge at the moment. I think it will take a meeting of the government's Cobra Committee before it's passed on to any other authority. But the Metropolitan Police will remain in charge of the initial investigation and managing what goes on the streets of London tonight, managing the commuter flows if there are any imminent threats, and that will all be the preserve of the Metropolitan Police.
Charles, can you remind us of the current threat level here in the UK and the overall threat level in Europe right now?
Absolutely. The current threat level is assessed as severe by MI5, so that's the British counterintelligence services and internal security services. Severe means that an attack is highly possible and probable, indeed, but there is one threat level that is higher than that, critical, which I assume the UK will be passed into in the coming hours. But the threat level has been extremely high in the UK for, I think, 3 or 4 years on the basis of intelligence, and the UK has been getting about people who have been fighting in the Middle East for ISIS and other forces coming back to the UK. In Europe, it's very much the same situation. Governments assume that terrorist attacks are likely, and as we've seen in the past few years in France, in Belgium, and in Germany, their assessment has been correct.
Charles, at what point will we know more in the sense, I mean, obviously you don't know when we'll know more, but will they keep everything running smoothly in London, at least for now? I'm talking, you know, public transit. Will schools remain open? I mean, this is going to be treated as an isolated incident around Parliament until we get any more information. Am I correct?
Yes, I mean, this, as far as terrorist attacks go, I mean, all of them are extremely unfortunate, obviously, but the scale of this one doesn't seem to have been huge, which means that I think all public transport facilities will remain open. The precedent in London for a large-scale terrorist attack in 2005 did not involve schools or offices closing the next day, and so I don't think that will happen. Some trains and tube lines were closed, but in this case I think that the terrorist attack is smaller and didn't involve public transport. For the moment, I think we should assume that people should be able to get home fairly smoothly tonight.
Charles, I just want to read a statement by the London Metropolitan Police asking people to avoid the following areas: Parliament Square, Whitehall, Westminster Bridge, Lambeth Bridge, Victoria Street up to the junction with Broadway, and the Victoria Embankment up to Embankment Tube. This is to allow the emergency services to deal with the ongoing incident. Now, police were called at approximately 2:40 p.m. London time to reports of an incident in Westminster Bridge. It is being treated as a firearms incident, the police say. Officers, including firearms officers, remain on the scene. We're treating this as a terrorist incident until we know otherwise. We thank the public for their assistance. That's the latest statement, Charles, from the Metropolitan Police. Eurasia Group's Charles Litchfield there. Thank you, Charles. We're going to come back to this story. You are watching Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg.